The rain hit the asphalt like a steady drumbeat, soft, relentless, accusing. Dr. Lena Caldwell stood beneath the flickering lights of a downtown checkpoint, her tailored navy suit soaked through, badge case in hand. The officer blocking her path didn't glance twice at it. "Ma'am," I said, "step back. This area is for authorized personnel only," he barked, his tone hard with the confidence of unexamined authority. Lena's fingers tightened around her ID. "I am authorized," she said evenly. The lamplight caught the gold seal of the U.S. federal judiciary embossed on the leather. He scoffed. "Yeah, sure. And I'm the president." He turned, smirking toward another officer. "They'll try anything, won't they?" The laughter wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to cut through her restraint. The sound lodged deep in her chest, cold and familiar. She'd heard it before, in boardrooms, in courtrooms, on sidewalks. Different faces, same disbelief. Behind her, traffic slowed, phones began to rise. A bystander whispered, "She's not lying." Another voice, "Doesn't matter. They don't care." Lena's pulse slowed the way it did before verdicts. Years of courtroom discipline steadied her breathing. Her voice came quiet, deliberate. "Officer, you are obstructing a federal judge." His smirk faltered for half a second, then hardened again. "Lady, if you don't step back, I'll arrest you for impersonating an official." Flashlights turned toward her. The night went still. The rain, the murmurs, the disbelief, it all blurred into silence, then a single, chilling sound. The snap of handcuffs opening. And in that frozen second before they closed around her wrists, Lena understood. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a message. The rain had thinned to a mist, the kind that clung to skin and made streetlights blur into halos. Midnight in downtown Richmond, then quiet, except for the hum of passing patrols. Dr. Lena Caldwell parked her sedan beside the barricade, badge case in hand, the weight of the federal hearing still sitting heavy on her shoulders. A flashlight beam hit her windshield. "Evening, ma'am." "ID," the officer said. His tone wasn't courteous, it was practiced control, the kind used on strangers expected to obey. Lena lowered her window and passed over her federal identification. The embossed gold crest of the judiciary glinted faintly. He barely looked. "What's this supposed to be?" "Official credentials. Judge Lena Caldwell, Eastern District," she said. He smirked. "Cute, never seen one like this." Her pulse quickened. "You can radio verification." He leaned on her car door. "Lady, this checkpoint's for authorized vehicles only. You're not cleared." "I just came from the federal courthouse." "Yeah? And I just came from Mars." His laugh was sharp, designed to humiliate. Another officer nearby chuckled. Lena inhaled slowly, courtroom breathing, controlled, deliberate. "I'm not your suspect, officer. Verify my credentials and I'll be on my way." He stepped back, folded his arms. "Step out of the vehicle." "For what reason?" "Possible impersonation of a federal officer." The phrase hit like a gavel. Lena's composure cracked for a moment, not in fear, but disbelief. He didn't see the authority in her tone, the history in her calmness. To him, she was a black woman arguing. She opened the door slowly, hands visible. The rain began again, thin streams running down her face. A small crowd watched from a distance, phones discreetly raised. The light caught her badge, gold seal, signature, photo, all dismissed in a single glance. Turner called out, "Ma'am, stop resisting." She hadn't moved. He grabbed her wrist. The cold steel of handcuffs met her skin, rain sizzling on metal. Her voice came quiet, even. "You're making a serious mistake." He looked down at her, eyes narrow. "No, ma'am." "You are." Somewhere behind, a bystander whispered, "That's Judge Caldwell." But the sound was swallowed by the rain and the click of the cuffs sealing shut. The fluorescent lights inside the precinct burned white and merciless. Their hum filled every silence, a constant sterile drone that made the place feel more mechanical than human. Lena sat on a hard metal bench, her wrists raw from the cuffs. The desk sergeant didn't meet her eyes as he processed the paperwork. The motions were automatic: name, address, occupation. When she said federal judge, his pen paused, then resumed as if she'd said magician. Turner leaned against the counter, wet from the rain, smirk curling at the edge of his mouth. "Impersonating a federal officer. Pretty creative charge, huh?" The sergeant grunted. "You sure about that?" "Paperwork's a pain if it doesn't stick." "Oh, it'll stick," Turner said. She flashed some fake credentials at the checkpoint, acted like she owned the place. Lena's voice cut through their exchange, calm but cold. My identification is real. I serve in the Eastern District of Virginia. You'll regret. Turner slammed his palm on the counter, interrupting. You don't threaten officers, lady. A silence dropped over the room. Every sound, the phones ringing, the shuffling papers, seemed to fade. Then mechanically the sergeant said, Take her to holding. They walked her down the hallway. The walls were gray, tiled, water-stained, the kind of institutional decay that no one noticed anymore. She caught glimpses of herself in the glass windows, a professional woman stripped of every symbol of status, reduced to a booking number. Inside the holding room, a camera blinked red from the corner. Turner shoved the paperwork into a slot. Fingerprint her, he ordered. Lena's voice was low. Do you understand the magnitude of what you're doing? He didn't answer. Instead, he gestured to the younger officer operating the fingerprint scanner. Print her and get her mugshot. Then maybe she'll quit pretending. The scanner beeped. The machine took her fingerprints, one press after another, capturing her identity like evidence of a lie. Face the camera, the young officer said softly. He avoided her gaze. His eyes flicked to the ID still clipped to the folder on Turner's desk. Something in his expression shifted. The flash went off. Done, Turner said. Get her back in the cell until morning. I'll call it in once the system clears her fake name. Lena lifted her chin. I want to speak to your captain. Turner smirked again. He's off duty. You'll have to wait till dawn, Your Honor. The mockery in his tone hit harder than the cuffs had. She swallowed the anger rising in her throat. Years of discipline trained her not to explode, not to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her lose control. The young clerk, a quiet, thin man in his 20s, hesitated at the door. Sir, he said to Turner, voice trembling slightly, do you have her full name again? Turner scoffed. Didn't I just say it? Lena Caldwell. Probably a fake alias from the internet. The clerk's brow furrowed. Caldwell, like Judge Caldwell? Turner's eyes narrowed. You know her? The clerk swallowed. Sir, I think that name's on the federal directory. She was in a hearing today, wasn't she? Stop talking, Turner snapped. You don't confirm anything until I say so. But the damage was done. The room had changed. The sergeant looked up from his desk, tension creeping into his shoulders. Lena spoke then. Quiet, deliberate, her tone almost surgical. Check the judiciary contact line. My badge number is 8471 FJD. You'll find me listed under the Eastern District. Turner stared at her, the certainty in her voice suddenly unsettling. You really think you can bluff your way out of this? Lena didn't answer. She looked past him, toward the wall clock ticking above the doorway. Each second stretched, waited with the kind of silence that breaks men who believe in control. The sergeant finally picked up the phone. Just to confirm, he muttered, dialing. Turner turned sharply. Don't waste their time. The sergeant raised a hand, listening, a pause. Then his eyes widened. He slowly looked toward Lena. It's true. She's listed. Federal Judge Lena Caldwell, Eastern District. Turner blinked, confused. What? No. That can't. The sergeant's voice was dry. It is. The U.S. Marshals are on their way. For the first time all night, Turner's smirk vanished. He looked at Lena, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. The uniform didn't protect him anymore. The weight of his arrogance began to crush him from the inside. Lena didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply said, You should have listened. The sergeant gestured to the clerk. Get those cuffs off her now. The metal clicked open, cold releasing warmth back into her wrists. She stood without a word, straightened her jacket, and adjusted her collar. Every motion precise, judicial. Turner tried to speak, but his mouth formed no words. The door opened. 2 U.S. Marshals stepped inside, their presence filling the small space with authority far heavier than his badge could ever carry. One marshal looked at Lena with respect. Judge Caldwell, are you all right, ma'am? Lena's eyes flicked to Turner, pale, trembling, suddenly aware of what authority truly meant. I'll be fine, she said. For now, the marshal nodded, guiding her toward the exit. The young clerk watched her go, his expression a mix of awe and shame. Behind them, Turner stood frozen, as if the fluorescent light had turned him to stone. The hum of the precinct returned. Same lights, same walls, but everything in it felt smaller now. And as Lena stepped out into the dawn, she thought only one thing. The law protects power. Tonight, power protected itself, but tomorrow she decided it won't. The precinct had gone eerily quiet. What had begun as another routine humiliation had become something far more dangerous. For them. Captain Rourke arrived 20 minutes later, called in from home by the urgent tone of the U.S. Marshal's report. His face was heavy with sleep and disbelief as he stepped through the door, the scent of rain still clinging to the hallway. "Where is she?" he demanded. "In interview 2, sir," the sergeant said, avoiding his eyes. The marshals released her but asked her to wait for formal statement clearance. Rourke's gaze swept across the room, then fixed on Turner. "You detained a sitting federal judge?" Turner's mouth opened, then closed again. "Sir, with all due respect, she was acting suspicious. She didn't identify herself properly. She showed you federal credentials." Rourke's voice cracked through the station like a gavel strike. "Are you out of your mind?" Turner's throat tightened. "They looked fake. You know how many—" "I don't care how they looked." Rourke cut him off. "You had one job. Verify, not humiliate." The sergeant shifted uncomfortably, hands clasped behind his back. The clerk who'd recognized Lena's name stood silently near the copier, trying to disappear. Rourke turned to him. You're the one who found the record?" "Yes, sir," the clerk said. Her ID number matched. "I cross-checked it twice before I told anyone." "Good. That's the only competent thing that's happened in this building tonight." He strode down the corridor toward the interview room. Turner followed, pale and sweating. Inside, Lena sat perfectly composed. The cuffs were gone, but the mark still reddened her wrists. Her posture was immaculate, back straight, eyes steady. Yet there was something in the air around her. A restrained fury, cold and precise. "Judge Caldwell," Rourke said, entering. "I'm Captain Rourke. On behalf of the department, I want to—" "Save it," Lena said quietly. "Your apology will be part of the record." The words landed like lead. Rourke cleared his throat. "Yes, ma'am, understood. I've initiated an immediate internal review. Officer Turner will be suspended," Lena finished for him. "Pending federal inquiry," Turner's voice cracked. "Judge, please, I didn't know." You thought what?" she said, turning her gaze on him. "That a black woman driving a federal vehicle couldn't possibly hold authority over you?" He stammered. "No, that's not what I—" "It is," she said flatly. "You didn't ask for verification because you never intended to believe me. That's not a misunderstanding. It's bias. And bias under color of authority is a civil rights violation." Rourke shifted uncomfortably. "Judge Caldwell, if I may." She looked at him, and the silence that followed made even the buzzing fluorescent lights seem distant. "You may not," she said. "You'll get my written statement. I'll file with the Inspector General and the DOJ. You'll also receive a subpoena for the body cam footage of tonight." Turner's eyes widened. There's an issue with that." Lena's tone went razor sharp. "What issue?" He hesitated, eyes darting toward the sergeant in the doorway. Rourke turned slowly. "Don't tell me it's missing." The sergeant looked sick. Turner told Jenkins to delete the preliminary clip. Said it was just a test file. Rourke's hand slammed the wall. "Jesus Christ," he rounded on Turner. "You tampered with federal evidence?" I thought it wasn't important." Lena stood, the chair scraping lightly against the floor. The motion was small but commanding. "Captain, lock that evidence chain now. Every file, every recording from this precinct tonight. Because if one byte disappears, I will ensure this department faces obstruction charges." Her tone was calm, controlled, deadly. The room froze. Turner tried to steady himself. "Judge Caldwell, please. I made a mistake. I was doing my job." She stepped closer, her voice low. "Your job is to serve, not to humiliate, not to profile, not to decide who deserves dignity. You didn't fail because you acted out of ignorance. You failed because you acted out of certainty. The certainty that people like me must be pretending." He couldn't meet her eyes. Rourke finally spoke. "We'll handle this internally, Judge Caldwell." She adjusted her blazer. "No, Captain. You won't. This goes beyond your walls now." The silence that followed wasn't defiance. It was the sound of an institution realizing it had already lost control of the narrative. Outside, dawn was breaking, soft gray light filtering through the frosted windows. The world outside was already moving. Morning traffic, news feeds waking up, cameras waiting for a story. Lena gathered her folder from the table and slipped her ID inside. As she turned to leave, the young clerk hurried to open the door for her. He looked terrified, but his voice was steady when he whispered, "I'm sorry, Your Honor." She paused. For the first time since the checkpoint, something in her expression softened. "Don't apologize for seeing what others refuse to." He nodded, eyes lowered. As she stepped out, Rourke called after her, "Judge Caldwell, for what it's worth, I'll make sure this department cooperates fully." She didn't turn around. "Cooperation isn't a favor, Captain. It's your duty." When the door closed behind her, the precinct felt colder, as if her departure had left behind a vacuum that nothing could fill. Rourke looked at Turner, still pale, still motionless. "You just handcuffed a federal judge on camera," he said slowly. "And then you deleted the footage." Turner's voice came out small. "What's going to happen to me?" Rourke stared at him. "You're about to find out what happens when the system you hide behind turns its gaze on you." Outside, Lena stepped into the early light. A news van passed by the corner, headlights cutting through the fog. She felt the first flicker of something that wasn't anger, not yet peace, but direction. This wasn't over, it had only begun. By morning, Richmond was awake and burning with noise. The first ping came to Lena's phone at 6:42 a.m., an alert from a journalist she knew distantly, a name she'd seen in bylines covering judicial ethics. The message was short. "Judge Caldwell, can you confirm your detainment by RPD last night?" She froze mid-motion, coffee half poured, the faint hum of her kitchen refrigerator suddenly deafening. Her phone vibrated again, then again. Within minutes, her inbox flooded, calls from colleagues, messages from anonymous accounts, headlines flashing across her lock screen. Federal judge wrongfully detained by local police. Identity denied, black female judge. Accused of impersonation. Video surfaces of arrest, sparks outrage. She didn't need to open them to know what had happened. Someone at the precinct, maybe the clerk, maybe a bystander, had leaked footage before the department could bury it. The world had seen Turner smirk, her cuffs, her restraint. Lena exhaled, steady but cold. "So it begins," she murmured. By the time she arrived at the courthouse, the steps were lined with cameras. Security guards parted the crowd as reporters shouted over one another. "Judge Caldwell, will you press charges? Do you believe race played a role in your detainment? Do you think Officer Turner should be fired?" She said nothing. Every word now was ammunition for someone. For the media, for the department, for the public narrative already twisting itself into spectacle. She kept walking, her heels clicking sharp against the marble floor, echoing in the hall like measured thunder. Inside her chambers, her clerk, a young woman named Aisha, looked shaken. "Judge, your photo's everywhere. They've got the video clipped down to 30 seconds. It's all over social media." Lena placed her bag down gently. "How bad?" Aisha hesitated. "Half the comments are supportive. The other half..." She trailed off, sliding a tablet across the desk. Lena didn't need to read them. She could feel the venom radiating off the screen. Words like entitled, liar, reverse racism. She pulled rank. "Has the administrative office reached out?" Lena asked. Aisha nodded. "They're concerned. The chief judge wants a statement assuring the public that you'll recuse yourself from any related proceedings." Lena let out a dry, humorless laugh. "They're more concerned with optics than justice." A knock interrupted them. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a private number and her mentor, retired Judge Martha Ingram, she answered. "Martha?" "Lena, I just saw the footage," Martha said, voice low, measured. "Don't say a word to the press. Let the storm pass." Lena paced to the window. Outside, the courthouse plaza swarmed with journalists, police, and protesters holding hastily printed signs. "Justice for Judge Caldwell." "End profiling now." "The storm is the story," Lena said. "If I stay silent, they control it." "Your silence is protection," Martha countered. "The department will eat itself, let them. Don't let this drag the judiciary through the mud." Lena's hand tightened around the phone. "I was humiliated on camera." "In uniform?" In front of citizens, I swore to serve. And now I'm supposed to hide? Not hide, endure, that's what we do. The call went dead. Lena stared at the black screen, her reflection faint in the glass. Her father used to say, "They'll tell you to be quiet while they rewrite what happened." He was right. She turned to Aisha. "Draft a letter. Short, factual, no emotion." Addressed to who? Everyone. Within the hour, her statement went public through official court channels. Last night, while returning from court, I was detained and handcuffed by local law enforcement, despite presenting valid federal credentials. The incident is under federal review. I trust due process to determine accountability. My duty remains to the Constitution and to the equal protection it guarantees for everyone. No embellishment. No anger, just fact, sharpened into a blade. The post spread instantly. News anchors dissected every sentence. Pundits argued about tone, decorum, race. The video looped endlessly. Turner laughing, her stillness, the cuffs. That night, Lena's phone rang again. This time the voice was low, familiar. "Captain Rourke, Judge Caldwell, I wanted to let you know. The department's internal affairs has opened an inquiry." I expected as much. Rourke hesitated. "Turner's already talking to the union. They're framing it as an overreaction, that he didn't recognize you, that it wasn't about race." Lena's tone stayed even. "It's always about recognition, Captain. What people choose to see." He said nothing for several seconds. Then quietly, "You're going to burn this place down, aren't you?" "No," Lena replied. "I'm going to let it expose itself." She hung up. Hours later, she sat alone in her apartment. The city skyline glowed against the dark, lights blinking like pulse monitors. She turned on the TV. There he was, Officer Blake Turner, speaking on a morning news show, uniform crisp, voice smooth. "I respect Judge Caldwell's position," he said, "but I was following procedure. Anyone could have been impersonating an official. This has nothing to do with race, and it's about safety." Lena watched, expression unreadable. The anchor smiled, softening the blow. "So you feel confident the department will stand by you?" Turner nodded. "Absolutely." The camera zoomed in, catching his eyes, steady, arrogant, unbroken. Lena reached for the remote and muted the sound. The image stayed on screen, his smirk, his badge gleaming under studio lights. In the silence that followed, she whispered to herself, "Then I'll make sure the truth speaks louder." She opened her laptop, fingers hovering above the keyboard. There were files she'd seen years ago. Misconduct reports sealed under administrative discretion. Names, numbers, redactions. If the department wanted to protect Turner, they'd have to protect all of it. And that meant they'd have to silence her first. The federal review hearing took place inside a marble chamber that smelled faintly of polish and tension. Rows of gray suits filled the gallery, notebooks open, pens ready. At the front, a semicircle of panel members, attorneys, auditors, internal affairs officers, waited behind a table heavy with files. Judge Lena Caldwell sat on the opposite side. Her posture was unflinching, her face neutral. But under the table, her fingers pressed tightly together, the only sign that her pulse was racing. The chairwoman, Eleanor Drake, adjusted her glasses. "Judge Caldwell, thank you for appearing voluntarily. This hearing concerns your detainment on the night of May 14th, and any subsequent misconduct by law enforcement." Lena nodded. "I understand." Across the aisle, Officer Blake Turner sat flanked by his union representative and department counsel. His once confident eyes had dulled, but his jaw was still set, defensive. Drake continued. "Before we begin, I must remind both parties this session is being recorded and will enter the public record." The room hushed. Cameras clicked. Turner's attorney rose first, smooth-voiced and rehearsed. "Madam Chair, my client acknowledges the unfortunate events of that evening. However, we intend to show that Officer Turner acted within standard safety protocols under uncertain circumstances. His actions were not racially motivated but precautionary." Drake nodded. "Proceed." The attorney turned toward Lena. "Judge Caldwell, would you agree that your identification could appear unusual to an officer unfamiliar with federal credentials?" Lena's gaze stayed steady. "No, Counselor. Federal credentials have standard markings. They are easily verified with one radio call, A call Officer Turner refused to make. Could it be, he pressed, that you appeared? He hesitated just slightly, defensive or non-compliant, perhaps prompting his response. The pause was everything. The phrasing appeared defensive, a polite code for looked threatening. Lena let the silence hang, then said evenly, I was detained because I didn't look like what he expected a federal judge to look like. The attorney shifted. You're implying intent. That's speculation. No, she said. That's pattern recognition. A low murmur rippled through the room. Drake raised her hand. Please confine questions to verifiable facts. Turner leaned forward, voice cracking through the tension. I wasn't trying to disrespect her. She was evasive. People forge IDs all the time. I followed protocol. Protocol? Lena repeated, turning slightly toward him. You didn't call dispatch. You didn't verify my credentials. You deleted your body cam file. Which part of that is protocol? Turner swallowed hard. I thought it was corrupted. Officer Turner, Drake interrupted sharply. You are under oath. He hesitated, eyes darting to his attorney. It was deleted by mistake. Lena didn't speak. She didn't need to. The quiet disbelief in the room said enough. The hearing continued for hours. Procedural recitations, chain of command questions, contradictory testimonies. Through it all, Lena remained composed, but her mind drifted beneath the formal language to the deeper machinery at work. Every phrase, misunderstanding, procedure, stressful environment, was a shield. Words designed to absorb blame without ever naming it. When the final witness stepped down, Drake folded her notes. Judge Caldwell, do you wish to make a closing statement for the record? Lena rose slowly. The scrape of her chair echoed. Every eye turned to her. Her voice was clear, unshaken. What happened that night was not a misunderstanding. It was the predictable outcome of unchecked bias and authority without accountability. I am not the first to experience it, only the least expected. Drake nodded slightly, but Lena continued. Officer Turner didn't see a judge. He saw a challenge to his assumption of control. The problem isn't just him. It's a system that rewards his certainty and calls it discipline. I don't want an apology. I want transparency. Every report, every deletion, every excuse, I want it documented. On record, the gallery was silent. Even the pens had stopped moving. Then Lena looked directly at Turner. You called me a liar. But you lied to yourself first, believing your uniform made you infallible. It didn't. Turner's face flushed red. He started to speak, but his attorney gripped his arm. Drake cleared her throat. Thank you, Judge Caldwell. The panel will deliberate and issue preliminary findings within 7 days. Lena gathered her papers, but as she turned to leave, one of the investigators, a quiet man from the office of the Inspector General, slipped a note across the table. She glanced down. 3 words, handwritten. You were right. Their eyes met briefly. He didn't elaborate. He didn't have to. Outside, the hallway buzzed with reporters, microphones flashing like weapons. Aisha waited by the elevator, eyes wide. How'd it go? Lena adjusted her coat. They heard me. That's enough for now. But will they act? Lena's lips pressed into a thin line. They'll try not to. Which means I'll have to make them. They stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, Lena caught a glimpse of Turner exiting the hearing room behind them, his attorney whispering urgently in his ear. His expression was no longer arrogance, and it was calculation. He wasn't done fighting, neither was she. That night, Lena sat in her study, replaying every moment in her mind. The questions, the coded language, the subtle defense of power. She opened her laptop, scrolling through internal databases she'd accessed for prior cases. Buried deep within one public record request was what she needed, a sealed internal audit, showing dozens of unsubstantiated bias complaints tied to Turner's precinct over the past 5 years. Her cursor hovered over the download button. Her oath bound her to the law, but the law, she realized, often bound itself to silence. She clicked download. Lena's inbox filled with emails, some from colleagues, some from activists, some from faceless individuals who had seen the video and felt compelled to share their stories. The messages ranged from heartfelt gratitude to vehement anger. A few carried threats subtle enough to be dismissible, overt enough to be chilling. She didn't read them all. By mid-afternoon, her office door was shut, the blinds drawn, and the phone on the desk was silent. Only the soft hum of the courthouse's air conditioning kept the space from feeling too still. Aisha stood in the doorway, hesitant. "Judge, there's a call for you. It's from Washington." Lena looked up, the weariness of the last few days suddenly settling on her shoulders. She stood, smoothing her blouse, trying to erase the tightness in her chest. "Thank you, Aisha. I'll take it in my chambers." The call was from an aide in the Senate Judiciary Committee. They were following up on her case, a rare inquiry given the recent media firestorm. The aide's voice was polite, but there was an underlying urgency beneath the civility. "Judge Caldwell," he began, "we've received your statement, and we're concerned about the broader implications of what's transpiring in Richmond. The committee may want to investigate further." Lena felt a sharp tension rise in her neck. The Senate had the power to scrutinize, to demand accountability from local law enforcement. But they were also known for their procedural slowness, their reluctance to act without public pressure. She'd seen enough cases dragged into the depths of bureaucracy to know that their concern often meant very little. "I appreciate your attention," she said carefully, "but I'm already committed to seeing this resolved through the federal review." "The committee may want to convene a hearing," the aide said. "It would be an opportunity to make a statement, to spotlight the issues of racial bias and abuse of power that have been raised by your case." Lena could hear the faint echo of reporters shouting, questions in the background. She glanced toward her window, watching the gathering storm clouds. "Senator Maynard has already issued a statement of support," the aide continued. "This could be your moment to help drive real change." Lena's grip tightened around the phone. The idea of a public hearing, the attention it would bring, both repelled and tempted her. She knew the weight of it, the chance to speak directly to the nation, to expose the failings of a system that prided itself on being just. But it also meant opening herself up further, subjecting herself to the same scrutiny that had already invaded her life. "I've made my statement," she said firmly. "You'll have my testimony when the time comes. But I'm not interested in spectacle. I want accountability." The aide's voice hesitated. "Understood, Judge, but if you change your mind." Lena ended the call, breathing slowly. She stood, walked to the window, and gazed out at the skyline. The rain had started again, soft at first, then harder, tapping against the glass like 1,000 small voices. A knock at the door. It was Aisha again. This time there was no hesitation in her eyes. "You've got a visitor, Judge, from the Richmond PD. He says it's urgent." Lena's stomach tightened. "What does he want?" "I don't know, ma'am. He's outside, wants to talk to you in person." Lena closed her eyes for a moment. There were only so many ways this could go. The department was on its back foot after the inquiry. Their every move was now under scrutiny. The last thing she needed was some officer showing up, demanding an explanation, or worse, playing the victim. But if they were coming to her, it was because they knew what they'd done, and that meant she could press harder. "Send him in," she said, standing to meet him. When the door opened, the officer who stepped inside wasn't familiar. He was older, mid-40s, with gray in his hair and a weary look in his eyes. His uniform was pressed, but his movements were stiff, like someone who'd seen too much and said too little. "Judge Caldwell?" He extended his hand slowly, his voice careful. She didn't take it, but she nodded. "What brings you here, officer?" He glanced around her chambers as if weighing the room, then sighed. "I'm Lieutenant Marco Davies. I'm here because I've seen the reports and I know what happened to you wasn't right. And I know Turner. He's not who he claims to be." Lena raised an eyebrow. "Not who he claims?" Davies sat down without waiting for an invitation. "Not in the way he presents himself. I've worked with him for years, but I've watched him overstep the line time and again. I can't defend him, not after everything that's come out." Lena remained quiet, but her curiosity deepened. "Go on." "Turner's got a history. There are complaints about his conduct. Racial profiling, harassment. But every time it gets reported, it gets buried. The department looks the other way." He paused. "What you experienced. It's not new, but now it's on the record and people are starting to listen. Why are you telling me this? I can't sit back anymore. I don't expect you to trust me. But I'm telling you this because someone needs to get him out of the force. And I'll back you up. I'm prepared to testify." Lena stared at him. The sincerity in his eyes was unexpected. She had seen so much avoidance, so much denial from other officers. It was rare to hear someone who seemed truly ready to stand against the tide. Testify to what exactly? To the systemic failures. Turner's history of abuse, the cover-ups. I've seen it firsthand. If you take this to trial, I'll make sure it sticks. Lena felt a tightness in her chest. This was the breaking point, the moment she could go further, the moment the system might finally start to crack. But it would come with a cost. There would be retaliation, more threats, more pressure. She didn't want to lean on this officer. She didn't want to need him. But the facts were clear. If she wanted justice, she couldn't do it alone. "Thank you for coming forward, Lieutenant," she said, her voice steady. "But know this, and if you help me, there's no going back for you either." Davies nodded. "I'm aware." Lena leaned back in her chair. The storm outside had grown more violent, the rain slashing against the window. The air in the room seemed charged, as though it were waiting for something to break. She stood. "We'll need to make sure every detail is airtight. I don't want any mistakes." "Understood." Lena paused, her hand on the door handle. "This isn't just about Turner. It's about the whole system. If we expose him, we expose everything." Davies met her gaze. "I'm ready." With that, Lena opened the door, and together they stepped into the storm, knowing that once they moved forward, there would be no turning back. The press had already latched onto every piece of the story. The headlines were now relentless. They painted Lena as a symbol of resistance of the broken system, but the narrative was still in the process of being shaped. The more they picked apart the police department's statements, the more cracks appeared in Turner's defense. But this was far from over. Lena sat at her desk in the quiet of her chambers, the evening light filtering through the blinds. The storm outside had passed, but the damage had already been done. She knew the real storm was still brewing, not in the skies, but in the corridors of power. Davies had given her something real. The records he'd uncovered, disciplinary reports, internal investigations that had been marked unfounded or closed, despite evidence to the contrary, were damning. They were enough to make Turner's position untenable. But it wasn't just his career that was on the line. It was everything. She looked at the file in front of her. A thick stack of documents, everything from Turner's past disciplinary actions to the internal emails about her detainment. Each page confirmed what she already knew. Turner wasn't a rogue officer. He was the product of a system that had protected him for years, that had swept his behavior under the rug. The next step was delicate. Lena had to act fast. The longer she waited, the more time the department would have to shore up their defenses to bury the truth. But going public too quickly risked creating a spectacle that would overshadow the real issues. She took a deep breath, grabbed her phone, and dialed. "Judge Caldwell?" It was Martha Ingram on the other end, voice steady. "What's going on?" "I've got the evidence." "All of it," Lena said, her voice calm but carrying a weight that was unmistakable. "Turner?" Martha asked. "His history. He's been covered up for years." "But this is bigger than him." Martha paused. "What do you mean?" Lena leaned back in her chair, glancing at the documents again. "This isn't just about Turner anymore. It's about the culture in the department, the way they've been sweeping these cases under the rug for so long. I'm not just going after him. I'm going after all of it." Another pause, but this time Martha's voice was more somber. "You're sure you want to do this?" Lena nodded, even though Martha couldn't see her. "I'm sure." The decision was made. By morning, the leak was everywhere. Lena didn't just release the files, she gave the press a full account. She wrote a detailed statement, explaining the systemic failures she had uncovered, naming names, pointing directly at the cover-ups that had allowed Turner's behavior to fester unchecked. She didn't just expose his actions. She exposed the layers of protection that had shielded him. The response was immediate. Turner's union immediately issued a statement, calling the accusations false and politically motivated. The department's spokesperson tried to downplay the release, claiming the internal investigation was ongoing and would address all concerns. But the floodgates had opened and there was no closing them now. By noon, the hashtag Justice for Judge Caldwell was trending nationwide. Lena sat at her desk watching the storm unfold. As calls flooded in, from news outlets, fellow judges, even Congress. Everyone had an opinion, but no one had the answers. The truth had been laid bare, and now everyone had to choose sides. And then, the phone rang. It was Captain Rourke. "Judge Caldwell," he said, voice tight. I've read the report. Lena waited. We'll do our part. The department will cooperate fully with the investigation, he said. There was a brief pause before he added, Turner's already been placed on administrative leave. Good, Lena said. Now make sure that doesn't change. I will. Lena could hear the tension in his voice. She knew he didn't want this any more than she did, but the department was no longer in control of the narrative. There was a knock at the door. Aisha stepped inside, a stack of paperwork in her arms. Her face was grim. Judge, there's another problem. Lena raised an eyebrow. What now? Aisha handed her a tablet, the screen filled with news footage. It was Turner. He was standing in front of a line of microphones, flanked by his lawyer. His voice was steady but filled with a practiced sorrow. Judge Caldwell's accusations are unfounded. This is all part of a larger political agenda, Turner said, his tone dripping with faux sincerity. I am a professional and I have always acted within the best interests of public safety. Lena's stomach turned. Aisha shook her head. He's framing it like he's the victim here, like the department's being attacked for doing its job. Lena's fingers tightened around the tablet. This is exactly what I was afraid of. He's going to play the martyr. It's working, Aisha said, eyes wide. The media's starting to take his side. Some are calling you a political pawn, Judge. Lena's jaw clenched. She had known this would happen. The moment the department lost control of the narrative, they would do everything they could to reclaim it. They would turn Turner into the victim and the poor, misunderstood officer who had been attacked for doing his job. And in doing so, they would attempt to erase the very truth she had exposed. She didn't have time for that. She stood, walking to the window and staring out at the city. The storm outside had passed, but the battle was far from over. The next phase was critical. It wasn't just about the truth anymore. It was about turning the tide before it could be manipulated into something else. Contact the Senate committee, she said quietly, turning back to Aisha. We need a public hearing. The truth has to be heard in front of Congress. They can't control that narrative. Aisha nodded. I'll make the arrangements. Lena didn't smile. She didn't celebrate the victory. She didn't even feel the relief that most would have in this situation. She felt the weight of the battle ahead. This wasn't just about one officer. This was about an entire system that had failed. A system that had been built on the very lies they were trying to sell. And Lena Caldwell was done letting them hide behind those lies. The Senate Judiciary Committee hearing was set for Thursday morning. The night before, Lena barely slept, tossing and turning in the quiet of her apartment, replaying every detail of the unfolding story in her mind. She had her testimony prepared, but she knew the room would be a battleground. This wasn't just a hearing. It was the moment she could either expose the system for what it was, or watch it bury itself deeper under layers of bureaucracy and empty promises. By 8 a.m. the next day, Lena was seated at the long polished table in the Senate committee room. The atmosphere was tense, charged with the kind of quiet that precedes a storm. The committee members were already filing in, taking their places. The media had gathered in full force, the room a tangle of cameras, microphones, and flashing lights. There was an undercurrent of anticipation in the air, like the moment before a gavel strikes, when everything feels suspended, when anything can happen. Lena stood to greet the panel. She wore a dark navy suit and sharp, deliberate. There was no room for softness today. This was about truth, and she would stand in its light no matter how much it burned. She took her seat. Aisha was a few feet away, her face calm but filled with the same intensity that had marked every step of this journey. Across from her sat a line of senators, some of whom were sympathetic, others less so. The one who caught her attention immediately was Senator Richard Maynard, the Republican chair of the committee. He had publicly supported her during the initial wave of coverage, but now in the cold light of the hearing, his eyes were narrowed, calculating. Senator Maynard cleared his throat as he spoke into the microphone. Judge Caldwell, thank you for being here. I trust you're aware of the gravity of the situation at hand. We are here to understand the full scope of what happened in Richmond and, most importantly, what the long-term effects of this incident might be on the department, on law enforcement, and on public trust. Lena nodded, keeping her voice steady. I am, Senator, and I am here to speak the truth. The room was silent for a moment. Then, without any more formalities, Maynard motioned for her to begin. Lena took a deep breath and started. On the night of May 14th, I was wrongfully detained by Officer Blake Turner of the Richmond Police Department. I was handcuffed, humiliated in front of the public, and accused of impersonating a federal official. A federal official I am. By the way, there was a slight murmur in the room, but Lena continued unfazed. What followed that night wasn't just an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern that has been ignored, buried, and dismissed for far too long. She paused, letting the weight of her words hang in the air. She could feel eyes on her, could hear the quiet shuffle of paper, the subtle shift in the committee members' postures, but she didn't waver. I've spent days now reviewing internal reports from the Richmond PD, and I've uncovered what I can only describe as a deliberate failure to hold officers accountable. Officer Turner was not a rogue officer. He was a product of a department that has shielded officers like him for years. Officers who disregard the very principles of justice they've sworn to uphold. There were gasps from some of the committee members. Others took notes furiously. Maynard's face didn't change, but Lena could see the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth. He wasn't liking this. We've already seen how Turner has responded to the exposure of his actions, denying accountability, framing himself as the victim. He isn't the victim here. The victims are every person, every citizen who has been profiled, misjudged, or harmed by an officer who didn't see them as a person, but as a threat. The system has allowed this to happen for too long. Lena's voice was unwavering now, each word a clarion call for justice, for transparency. She looked directly at the committee members, her gaze steady. I am not here to settle a personal vendetta. I am here because, as a judge, as someone who swore an oath to uphold the law, I cannot sit by and watch as this system perpetuates itself. The system is broken, and if we are ever to heal it, we must confront what lies beneath. The implicit bias, the cover-ups, the protection of those who abuse power. Senator Maynard leaned forward. Judge Caldwell, I understand your position, but we must consider the broader implications of this. Do you believe every officer in the Richmond Police Department is complicit in this? That every officer is biased? Lena didn't flinch. No, Senator. I don't believe every officer is complicit. But I do believe that a system which continually shields officers who engage in discriminatory behavior, officers who weaponize their authority based on race, gender, or other biases, has a responsibility to answer for the damage done. Another senator, a younger woman, Senator Harris Murray, spoke up. What do you propose, Judge Caldwell, that we do about this? What measures can be taken to ensure that such systemic issues are not only identified, but eradicated? Lena allowed herself a moment to gather her thoughts. We start with transparency. We start with accountability. No more sealing records. No more sweeping complaints under the rug. We need real oversight, not the kind that passes with a slap on the wrist, but oversight that requires action. We need an independent body to review every incident like this, and we need strict consequences for those who perpetuate abuse. The room was still. Lena's words hung in the air, stark and resolute. Then Senator Maynard spoke again, his voice slightly more measured than before. And if the department refuses to comply, if they resist these reforms? Lena didn't hesitate. Then we hold them accountable in court, and we let the public decide, because that is what justice requires. It requires the truth to be seen. No more hiding, no more obfuscation. She felt the weight of the room shift. The tension was palpable now, the stakes clearer. This wasn't just about one officer. This was about a culture that had allowed this to continue, and now it had been exposed. Senator Maynard stood, his expression unreadable. Thank you, Judge Caldwell. We'll take this under advisement. As Lena stood to leave, she felt something within her shift. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had spoken the truth, and the world had heard it. Now all she had to do was wait for the reckoning to begin. The days following the Senate hearing felt like an odd mix of silence and noise. News cycles churned with headlines of the testimony, experts weighed in, and public opinion began to polarize as expected. But Lena remained silent. She'd said everything she needed to say, and now it was in the hands of those who claimed to stand for justice. The Richmond Police Department's response was swift, though predictable. Turner, once so confident in his public persona, now barely spoke to the press. The union's defense crumbled under the weight of the revelations. Their statements grew weaker, less sure of themselves, and they made the fatal mistake of attacking the credibility of Lena herself. A statement was released by the department, the words carefully crafted. It was apologetic without being truly remorseful, acknowledging the incident as an unfortunate mistake, while subtly blaming miscommunication and stressful circumstances. But they were still positioning Turner as a victim of a public smear, not a perpetrator of racial bias. It didn't matter. The evidence had already been exposed, and it was now too late to close the floodgates. The next blow came from within the department itself. A whistleblower, someone high within the ranks, leaked confidential documents to the press, corroborating much of what Lena had stated. These documents, some of them dating back 5 years, outlined multiple complaints against Turner and a series of unsolved cases involving racial profiling, misconduct, and false reports. The leaks were surgical, precise, and damning. The department's strategy of silence and denial could no longer protect them. Within hours, the FBI announced they would be launching an independent investigation into the Richmond PD's practices. Turner was placed on indefinite suspension, and the Internal Affairs Division was ordered to re-examine every single incident linked to him. The walls were closing in on him fast. Lena watched it all unfold from her office, her phone buzzing incessantly. Messages of congratulations poured in from colleagues, from friends, even from strangers. Activists sent her thank you notes, and former victims of police violence reached out, telling her their stories. It felt like a victory, a win for the cause. But there was something cold in the pit of her stomach. She wasn't celebrating, not yet. The truth was, Lena wasn't sure who would fall harder in the end, Blake Turner, or the system that had allowed him to thrive. By the end of the week, the pressure had become unbearable for Turner. He was quietly dismissed from the force, not with the kind of finality that would offer closure, but with a carefully crafted severance package. A resignation, not an admission of guilt. He was given the space to slink away, but his reputation was already in tatters. The media circled like vultures as Turner's story shifted from an internal scandal to a public embarrassment. No longer just a disgraced officer, but a symbol of everything wrong with the system. But it was the aftermath that would come to define everything.